Welcome to Thinking Green. Election Day is 3 weeks away, and so I guess it won't surprise any viewers that over the next couple of weeks we will be focusing on candidates, specifically Green Party candidates for various offices in the region. Just to let everyone know, the last regular day to register to vote, if you haven't yet, or if you changed your address, is October 30th. And in most towns, the registrar offices are open all day on the 30th if you want to come in, or you can mail in or register online. And part of the reason I mention this, partly the focus on candidates, but partly this week and next week as well, we're going to talk about a specific office which doesn't get enough attention, which is the Registrar of Voters. And tonight's guest is Cassandra Martineau. She is the Green Party candidate for Registrar of Voters in Windham. And those New Londoners who watch this, we can't do this. We have appointed registrars, so we cannot participate in elections for them, but most towns in Connecticut can, and I wish we could. Anyway, welcome, Cass.
Thank you.
And
bit of an oddity in our own town because the Democrat and the Republican are appointed, and they get in no matter how many votes they get. Literally, I have to get votes to get in as a third-party candidate on the Green Party. Literally, if every single person in town, it could happen, voted for me and no one else, the Democrat in Willimantic and the Republican will both still get in. They'd still be appointed. This would just get us a third registrar.
Yeah, so the Democrats and Republicans, I think this is state statute, so New London might be the only anomaly that even though there is an election on paper and people can vote, they are guaranteed to win even if they come in last.
Right, so it's a symbolic vote here in New London.
Yeah, here
and in most other towns, because you don't generally get a third party running for Registrar of Voters.
Right, but the Green Party, has done a little bit to make that better. In Windham, you've had Registrar of Voters candidates for a few election cycles now.
I will be the third person running in Willimantic for the Green Party, following Dagmar Knoll, who made a very good run. There are many people in Willimantic who still think she's the Registrar of Voters, even though she never quite made it in. And Doug Larry, who did a lot of great foundational work in that as well. I'm hoping this will build upon that, and I think I can make a pretty good argument for having 3 registrars in most cases. First of all, if a conflict came up and it's just a Democrat and a Republican, he said, she said, there's no tiebreaker in that and nobody to look over those other 2. I know in Willimantic we have a good 47% of our voters are unaffiliated, as are many throughout the state of Connecticut. They have no representation in the Registrar of Voters, nor do any of the minor parties. So I think we can make a good democratic argument, as well as a functionality argument for being able to have this important role done. And the functionality comes, I know there are, and I think you're pretty good in New London, or maybe some of the people are a lot of times in a lot of towns, people are starting to age out. Generally, it's retirees who take this job. They have the time, to run for it and do the process. But also, in some towns, there's not even interest in running. For people who don't know, Registrar of Voters, what's that? What do they do?
Yeah.
Could be nothing. It's you don't even think about it for your day-to-day voting, unless it isn't there.
Yeah, and at this time of year, it becomes very obvious if it's not there. I know that the Green Party has taken advantage of some towns that have elections for registrar, and the Democrats or the Republicans don't have any candidate.
Town of Union.
Yeah, so
found
the Green,
a gap and a need, and somebody was interested from the Green Party in filling that gap. So, it's a nice way so much of politics is competitive. This one isn't. It's just a really great place where they can fill a need and be of public service.
And unlike you, he will have a relatively easy path to actually getting in, because if the Green Party candidate gets into first place or second place, they're in. And
with no one else running, that's a much lower bar to reach.
yeah, unfortunately, in Wyndham, though, there's quite an imbalance, as in New London, between the Democrats and the Republicans. I'm guessing the Republicans always do manage to come up with a candidate.
They do have a candidate, and if I am to get in, I need to get more votes than that candidate. She will get in as well, regardless. Thought it might be good to talk a little bit about why it doesn't matter. Who cares if we have an ROV or not?
Yeah, please, and not even quite getting into why 3 would be better than 2, but
why
sure,
even do we have 1?
Yeah. So what do registrars of voters do?
So many Greens I know who just really appreciate process and making sure that process runs smoothly, and this is what the registrars of voters do. I compare it to if you look at a web address, something.com. It's the dot. You never think about that dot. I believe it's Sun Company in California or whatever. But that dot actually means something, and they're the ones running all the stuff behind the internet. Same with Registrar of Voters. We're the ones, making sure that the lists are proper, helping people to get voted onto the list who want to be, making sure people who have moved out of town are cleared off the list, and that the people who are supposed to be on there are on there. Plus actual during, which is basically a lot of clerical work during the year. My campaign literature said included the qualification geeky enough to want the job.
And that is a help. You have to like those details.
Well, we have so many concerns and so many people being purged off these days, off of lists, and other concerns about being who's allowed to be on that list and who isn't, and it's the Registrar of Voters who take care of that and make sure that that runs smoothly and properly. And then, of course, during the elections, we're the ones who be monitoring all the ballots and monitoring to make sure, what hanging chads are counted, or which, as we can see, that can be politicized as well. And again, I think that's a reason for having a third person in there. It just helps keep the process all that much more monitored and honest.
I think at one time the thought was, if you made it a bipartisan office, the Republicans and the Democrats would be checks and balances on each other. But as you noted, with the 47% unaffiliated voters plus probably at least the other 3% minor party members, more than half the voters are not in those 2 parties. So we don't live in a bipartisan state, and none of our towns are really bipartisan. We're multi. It's
anybody in any town. It's not that difficult if you have the skills to start your own party. And we see that, Working Families has parties throughout, as does the Green Party. But, in Willimantic, for instance, we have the Bottom Line Party. It exists nowhere except the town of Willimantic. And we have candidates from Working Family, candidates from Green Party, candidates from Bottom Line in positions throughout the town of Willimantic. So, we're really being served by a great diversity of parties and active citizens. And I think the process should reflect that a little bit more fully.
In New London, at one time we had a city party called One New London, which it had a very specific function. It was opposed to the eminent domain abuse. And they did get a couple people elected, not quite enough to change the course of history, and then they kind of faded into the woodwork. But, we've gotten Green Party members elected. And, so slowly, I think in some towns where minor parties have been active, we're seeing government being a little less bipartisan, but the Registrar of Voters office still isn't.
You know, it seems like it's gone the way of debates these days, which, you know, I remember when the League of Women Voters ran it 20 years ago. This is before Clinton, I think.
Yeah.
And, you know,
So
they opened that up, and that's how we got the opening in that presidential run of Ross Perot. And, it, you know, being able to have third parties and extra ideas in an open system actually allows a little bit more creativity and a little bit more voices in there. That can make a difference. That's been closing up over the last 20, 30 years and much of my adulthood. And I see the debates getting more and more narrow and
more
again,
and more
these
scarce.
positions that are just, you know, it's, yeah,
you know, it's really disturbing that this year, I think 2 years ago, there were 4 debates for congressional candidates in the 2nd District. And you know, I think there was one in Plainfield, one in Willimantic, one in New London, and one in Clinton. And the Clinton one was a high school club. I think the high school club is the only one that's now doing debates because without having a viable Republican candidate, even though we also have a Green Party candidate for 2nd Congressional District, Michelle Louise Bicking. Dan Reel is running on the Libertarian line. And if we had all 4 candidates, you know, in a room together, we could really have a great sharing of ideas.
And that's what democracy, small d democracy, should be all about. And that's why I think it's so important to include these candidates. Even, you know, everyone's, oh, well, you have no chance of winning. Well, we have been winning on municipal levels, first of all. But even on the larger scale, I think it's really important that we get exposed to a lot of ideas and that are outside the corporate structure, which honestly at this point, you know, especially going up the chain and on the national level, the Democrats are just so corporate as much as the Republicans. I think having a viewpoint outside that, you know, we've forgotten the perspective that these are not the only 2 choices, and it doesn't have to be the corporate left-leaning or the corporate right-leaning party. Wasn't always corporations ruling everything the way we are. We're starting to take that for granted, like Citizens United is written in stone, has been with us since the forefathers, and nothing's further from the truth.
And I'm thinking that even if the ultimate winner of most of the big races were the Republican or the Democratic candidate, just having all those conversations about issues would change the way they serve once they're in office.
And the way the citizens view the issues themselves. You know, in a democracy, small d democracy, it's that information and that discussion is just so vital. And the more narrow that gets, I think the citizens are just, you know, more poorly informed, and that, you know, it's change can come in democracy with elected officials from grassroots efforts. But we have to know what the issues are and what the different possibilities are and what the different choices are in order to be able to affect that. And the more we limit those messages, the more people become disempowered. So, I mean, as a candidate for Registrar of Voters, please register to vote. Vote, get involved in the process. It's not just about stamping what some party official has decided. You know, you have a voice. It's important to use it. That's empowerment for each and every one of us. The more active and involved, you know, going to town meetings, getting involved in primaries, getting involved in some of that party work, that's all about us gaining power for our individual voices and bringing these together in a collective way. So
it seems harder and harder to really become informed about the candidates, but it's really more important than ever. I think we're seeing even more than we have, you know, over a decade ago or 30, 40, 50 years ago. We see a lot of people who seem to be voting against their own interests. And a kind of a dream of mine or a fantasy of mine would be not to have any names on the ballot, just have the platform.
The platform.
and let people like vote for the platform that they want, and then they get the votes would go to the candidate whose platform it is, because
then you're actually voting for ideas and not just, yay, my party's whatever, right or wrong.
Right. I mean, having like participation in debates dependent on polling, well, it becomes sort of a downward spiral. It's like, well, how's anyone going to learn about these minor party candidates if the mainstream media won't cover anything about them? And then if people can't find out about them, then how can they ever get to that threshold?
And I know people say, well, you can't just open it to everyone, it'll be willy-nilly. And it's like, you can just open it to the people who are on the ballot.
Right.
Then you've got 4 or 5 voices instead of just the 2. But it's not just, a wild everybody and their dog is coming up and giving their opinion either.
Right, and we can start, then would be able to start talking about ranked choice voting as well, so that people could, vote for the platform or the person for second, third choice, which I think would have a great effect of making campaigns less like a competition and more like a thoughtful process.
Well, that just might lead to the best possible candidates, so we can't have that.
And it's funny process.
Well, I just wanted to go back to what you were talking about earlier, because I get a little cynical about even what somebody says is their platform. And if you've got the time and resources, I suggest looking into who the funders are for different candidates, especially in national.
Right.
When we see Joe Courtney saying no to universal health care, but yes in promoting at the same time that universal health care is being offered in Congress, he's promoting a different for-profit version. And we see his connections to the healthcare industry in Connecticut. That might be, maybe he's not really trying to incrementally get us towards universal health care. Maybe he's trying to stop not-profit health care from coming to town.
Well, this is always a constant issue with the Green Party, because I think it's really important, and the one most important reason that I am a Green is that the party does not take those special interest dollars, because we are responsible to the voters and not to any other entity.
Not even unions or other
we don't. We welcome the endorsements, but we return the check.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really important, but on the other hand, we're always running campaigns like from the point of view of being broke. So how do we level that playing field?
Well, that goes to the whole, especially on the national level, Citizens United is, all of a sudden it seems like it's been written in the Constitution, and I don't see any Democrats fighting against Citizens United. They're just kind of, the second it passed, they throw up their shoulders, that's the way the game is played, and jumped even more deeper into the pockets of the corporations. We need a massive reform and to take money out of the political process. We had that, and I remember there's a few years ago in a state of Connecticut, somebody talked about, wrote a whole article about, the cost of politically funding and, the candidates who are in there versus the cost that we end up spending in the budget to the special interest groups that we have to pay favors back to. If you're getting elected because you've taken a lot of money from a group, you've got a lap to sit on. They're going to try and pretend like they're all out for us, or that this one corporation is all great for all of 2nd District, and it might be good for a couple small little pockets, but their interests are not necessarily our interests, and when their interests are paying the interests on the the campaign funds, I think it's naive to think they don't have to answer back.
Yeah,
and like you say, the Green Party, we answer to the citizens who vote us in.
Yeah,
That's
so
it.
People might not agree with us, but some people will vote Green just because they know we're
It's
honest.
an honest party, right? I'll go out and I personally, I will talk to and listen to any. I've been at town hall and I'm a lefty. help me out. There was a Republican made a comment about something that I agreed with. You know, it's important to be able to listen to all sides and to understand, you know, especially in town, you're talking about, you know, great projects you want to spend money on, but there's a tension between that and the taxpayers. And how can you try to realistically address all those tensions and not just say it's one side and it's not the other, but, you know, bring it back. And I think too much with the bipartisan, they get locked into one side and the other, and, you know, that's not a path forward that looks for solutions.
Now, since you mentioned taxes, the towns that do have third registrars, there are a couple of them in Connecticut now. How does that work from a budget point of view? Do you know how different towns pay the third registrar without it costing a lot more money?
That could be an issue once I get elected into Willimantic. So yeah, stay positive.
Yeah. I would say personally, it's a good return.
Well, no, it's a good question, and a lot of people in Willimantic might want to think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, there are about 3 ways that I can think of. I don't know exactly how it's done in other towns. One is to just increase the budget and have another salary pay. And I know a lot of people are saying, oh, slow down there. It would be just a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of the budget.
Yeah.
But if you're still qualmy about that, then either the 2 other models that I've heard of, one is just taking that, okay, in Willimantic it would be $22,000 for the 2, so just take that and divide it 3 ways, and we each get 7 and a change.
Well, Willimantic does not pay its registrars well.
No, it's a job of love more than money making. Some towns do. The other model, which I kind of like, is just pay the person, you know, pay it by the hour. See who's doing the hours and doing the works. Now, and a lot of times in the town where the party who's in control, like in Willimantic, Democrats have control of the town, and the Democratic Registrar of Voters much more highly incentivized to do that work than the Republican
and has more work to do.
Is.
It's probably trying to keep track of 5 times as many people.
Well, it's not like the Democrats just keep track of the Democrats and the Republicans.
Right.
You know, if that were the case, half the population would be ignored. You need me. But
well, I agree. They need you.
But I mean, technically, anybody who can do all the work, but realistically, it's who shows up, and there's nothing in place that, you know, says that work has to be done or monitoring that. So, you know, it tends to be, you know, in our town, the Democratic person is a lot more incentivized, so dives into it a lot more deeply.
I would think that money for a registrar of voters, but maybe this is my thought because I'm kind of geeky too, is a town gets a lot of return on the investment of that job well done.
I've heard some talk too about regionalizing that, which might help with just some of the skills, if that's able to be. But again, it's just such an underappreciated and so necessary job. Nothing in the voting process works well or works properly without good, well-trained, dedicated registrars of voters to make sure that process goes well.
Now, our country can't really function well if we don't have faith in our voting process, which I would say...
Are we running into that anyway?
I'm not saying we haven't gotten there already, but real confidence in the voting process, we've actually had doubts for almost 20 years now in this country. But it seems as though right now we have an epidemic of voter disenfranchisement. There have been some very high-profile states. Alabama's instituting a poll tax.
I know, and
Georgia,
North Dakota with the natives.
So, what can we do about that? And is there a way that getting involved in a local level can help?
Well, I've been putting my money where my mouth is as far as that with politics and really getting involved locally myself. And I absolutely encourage, everyone to. I mean, certainly we're seeing what we view and what are packaged as national crises. But what becomes a national crisis is because lots and lots and lots of little ones are either unmonitored or monitored poorly, or they're just forgotten. And being able to, take care of that at the bottom level, and, every individual who gets involved, because you can have some issues in town, that I think just greater involvement is going to make it more honest. I know in Willimantic, for instance, I'm thinking of like Sanctuary City, or the fracking ban that got passed. These were not initiatives that were put forth by our town council, but we got a lot of active citizens. We filled town hall, and we had 100 people comment after comment saying why this was such a good idea. Well, when you're doing that right in front of the town council, it makes it a lot more difficult for them to vote against you. So we really have a lot of power locally if we can organize and have faith in that and use that. And a lot of the, that fracking ban is, for instance, is starting to turn into a greater statewide. So a lot of times these national initiatives, start out at that local level, and that really is important. Get involved in the towns. Not just voting, but doing primary work, get involved with your parties, go to town hall, commission meetings, find out what's going on.
And I think that our municipal elected officials have to be more responsive to the citizens, because, they meet us in the grocery store, on the street, in the bars, in the restaurants.
It's your neighbor.
In the art galleries. It could be, it could be your neighbor. So I think that for really being active, local is good. I think New London and at least the Willimantic part of Windham have a lot in common. And one challenge in terms of enfranchising all voters is keeping track of low-income people who move a lot, who are renters. How is that handled in Willie? Is there a way that it can be improved upon?
Well, I know I've been personally involved with, pardon my poor Spanish, Registrar of Voters, and worked with the NAACP and other groups doing voter registration. When you have a higher turnover of citizens, then you do need to really be a lot more active getting people registered once they've moved out. But that's also another good argument for having another good, well-trained registrar of voters in town, just because those people who have moved out do need to be removed. And a lot of times when you're looking at those, some people have P.O. boxes, some people are, have their home address in one place and a mailing in another, and all that needs to be able to sort it out competently to make sure that the people who are voting are the ones who are supposed to be voting.
Right.
And the people who have moved to another town are cleared off this list. If you're on 2 lists, if you move, people, you have to change your voter registration. If you are on 2 lists, like say if somebody moves out of Willimantic, they vote in Willimantic this year, and then next year they move over to Coventry, and they're registered to vote over there. Now, but if they didn't cancel out their Willimantic, they're on 2 lists. Somebody looking at that might choose the wrong one to strike you from, and you go to the voting booth, and it's like, I'm sorry, you're not registered to vote here. What? So you have to really keep track of that and keep it updated. But again, it's the ROV person who takes the person off the list and tries to check out and double check that.
And we have that. I mostly look at the Green Party list in New London, which is pretty manageably sized. But there are people who are on there who I know should not be on there, people who married and changed their last name, and they're registered under both their maiden and their married names at the same address, but if they might have registered with different parties, they probably don't know that they're registered twice, so I don't think they're going to abuse it. It wasn't intentional.
No,
but the
I'm
list
sure
is
not.
not
But
an
the
accurate
concern is you might not be able to, if there's any of these inconsistencies show up, that might impede your ability to vote. So my concern is for the voter in that case. But keeping the list clean just helps the process and helps the person as well. fun fact, go online to, I think it's CT Vote.
Yeah.
It takes about 5 minutes. You can double check your own registration. If you're not registered for a party and would like to be, you can change that very quickly and easily. Make sure you're registered in the town that you're living and that you would like to vote in. If you've moved recently, that will need to be updated. But it's so quick and easy. And if you're not registered, it's just as quick and easy.
I know I've done an internet search just on like SOTS voter lookup, and it's one of the first hits. And I don't think, Connecticut does have some voting access problems, but I don't think we've had the massive disenfranchisement we're seeing in some other places. But before October 30th, I think everyone should check with the lookup and make sure you're registered. And if you're not, or if you want, as Cass said, if you want to change your party, you can do that online also until October 30th.
It takes only a few minutes. It's really quick and easy.
For people who move, either turn 18 after October 30th but before Election Day in that week, or who move during that week, you can register in person and change that. And a few years ago, Connecticut started Election Day registration, so you can just go to one central location in town and just register and vote all in one.
On that day?
Yeah.
So what do you need for that? Just
I think you need your photo ID.
One legal ID is good enough?
I think a legal driver's license is enough. I'd bring extra ID just in case. And I would recommend not waiting till 5 till 8 in the evening.
Right.
Because I saw the ACLU was advertising that if you're in line by 8, they are supposed to let you register and vote, and not turn
some
you
of the
away.
areas
But
they limit polling places. It's one of the way they rig the vote to make it less convenient for people to vote. So I think they're trying to send that message out. If you're in one of those areas, stick it through. They can't kick you off just because you didn't make it in that door by 8.
Right. So in New London, the Election Day voters have to go to City Hall rather than one of the satellite polling places. So it's good to check, good to make sure. I would recommend registering before October 30th if you can.
Always better to be ahead of it.
It is. That way you can make sure, and you might not have your letter in hand confirming that you're registered, but if you are newly registered, it's probably a good idea to bring that letter to the polls if you have it. So I know it was really disturbing, and I don't think, we put these shows on YouTube, but I don't think that many people out of state are watching them. But there are several states that we have seen massive voter disenfranchisement, and it's either in Alabama targeting poor people by making you pay to vote, or in North Dakota requiring an ID that Native Americans, how ironic is that, are not considered, don't have the right ID, so they might be disenfranchised. People in Texas with Spanish last names.
I believe in Atlanta, Georgia, large, and I don't remember the numbers, huge numbers of black residents.
Yeah, it was like 5 digits, I think.
Cut off, purged off instantly. And it's like, because the Republican might lose if they can vote, But I think this is why we really need to start getting a deeper understanding of the process itself. And, it's the excuse that's being used every time is voter fraud, like billions of people are just coming into the United States under false ID and foreign nationalists and swarming and overwhelming our votes and voting for Hillary Clinton and whatever they're doing, And that's just crazy. There's no evidence. I mean, like on a state by state, there's like 3 or 4, and there may as well be mistakes as
let's face
anything
it,
else.
It's quite
the
risky.
disenfranchisement is the real issue.
And of course, we saw it big time in Florida in 2000, and I think that might have been kind of a test case. Can we get away with it? Because many, especially African Americans, were turned away from the polls. They were told that, they were supposedly felons. They were not. So what we're talking about, disenfranchisement, one thing that
unfortunately, the Democrats have done that too. They did it to Bernie Sanders in New York, in his own borough, purged a whole bunch of people who were in his demographic.
Yeah.
So I think we really need to, as citizens, just need to really be aware of what's going on and what's going on. I mean, many of the towns in Connecticut and, throughout the Connecticut are parsed up, Democrat, Republican, so it's going to, either one is solid, and now we've got this nicely evenly split. And all of this takes away our power and our voice. And
actually our confidence in our government. I mean, I have not felt that our current president was elected legitimately, and I think that a lot of his behavior leads me to believe that he actually knows that he was not elected legitimately. And
I think the same thing was true in 2000.
Absolutely,
when
and
Supreme
2004,
Court decided not to count votes. How constitutional can you get? And that's before we had the Supreme Court we have now. So the only answer, and honestly, it may already be too late, but I'll tell you what, sitting at home complaining about it will never change a damn thing. Getting active, getting out is the only chance we have. And learning about that process and getting involved and holding our representatives accountable. And when that system goes awry, then it requires, we defend our democracy or we lose it. And this is one of the ways. It's not just going out and killing foreigners.
And
it's
honestly,
actually the vote, defending the vote.
If people in every town showed themselves in numbers, we know already the local officials kind of have to be responsive to some extent to the citizens because they might live in the same block. They can't escape them. They're not in any kind of ivory tower. So talking about you and your political activism history, you probably didn't start out running for electoral office. I'm guessing that
my very
you did
first
a lot.
thing in 1985 was anti-apartheid work over at Carnegie Mellon University, where I was attending. No, I was on the outside of and followed through. I've done lobbying and calling and all the great things all good activists do. I was, out getting signatures for people for gay marriage here in Connecticut. I know the Supreme Court did it, but in order to get it through legislatively, we're making a push for that.
Right.
I was walking in the halls of the state of Connecticut for transgender rights, trying to work for that. I'd done a little bit of outside, I think it was 2004, Dennis Kucinich was the long shot in the
oh God, that was a year, by the way.
I headed up the whole northeast quadrant. I think all 20 of us. So that was up until that point. That is about as
Oh, that's interesting. 2004 actually was the year I stopped being a Democrat because I voted in the presidential primary for Dennis Kucinich, and I don't remember who was running for Congress, but there was a Democratic primary, and the person I voted for lost. And then there was a very local primary for state rep between Ernest Hewitt and Lloyd Beachy, and that was kind of a referendum on our whole eminent domain policy, and my candidate lost. And the day after that last August primary, I thought, I'm just
enough is enough.
I'm just too outside of the Democratic Party to really influence them. All 3 out of 3. It wasn't a winning record.
I think, that's gotten even worse. It seems like the Democrats' main campaign strategy for November is, to hell with those screwy lefties, you have to come to the center with us or else you get Trump. And that's not a great argument in my mind. And just seeing the way that, the Democratic Party, I'd gone back and forth for primaries in the Green Party. I respect the ideals of the Green Party. But I kind of was, it's like, okay, the Democrats are the ones there. You have to deal with them. So I kind of played back and forth. It just felt the whole process felt to me so corrupted in that primary that I just kind of really, and I saw, again, Joe Courtney, most of the people in 2nd District voted for Bernie Sanders, and Joe Courtney refused to change his superdelegate vote away from Hillary Clinton to Bernie Sanders. And I saw that, and that just seems such arrogance and such, our representatives are not representing us. How can that be? When I see, in 2nd District and around the country, okay, 3/4 of Democrats and almost half of Republicans want universal health care. Democrats won't touch it. They're fighting against it.
No one wants to touch it. But
why won't they respond to what the citizens want? They're not representing us. And, the influx of corporate money, I just feel has corrupted the entire process so much. And I think that's one of the reasons people are staying home and not voting.
And that's really the tragedy of it, because the people who stay home could change the course of the elections. If they didn't stay home, then the crooked dealings would not be able to be so successful.
The most votes for the president in 2016 wasn't Donald Trump.
It was not.
Wasn't Hillary Clinton. Wasn't Jill Stein. It was the massive amount of people who stayed home and didn't even vote. And that's a power to change everything. And I know people are disgusted with that process. But I think the Democrats and Republicans both are like in this propaganda, machine to make us, anyone green or anyone left of, Wall Street as like this socialist freak who's never got a chance. Well, it turns out a lot of our positions, if you take them away from the liberal label, the progressive label, issue by issue by issue, most people know global warming is real and it's caused by people and they want it to change. Boom! Green Party.
And
Democrat makes rhetorical noise towards it, but they're all bought and sold by the big oil. Okay, most people want the universal health care, but most people want that fight for 15. Most people want Wall Street regulated again and that money out of it. And yet these are considered wild, crazy positions. No wonder people get disaffected. Well, you know what? Get out there and vote anyway, even if you think it doesn't matter, even if you think it's going to go nowhere. What if we had that 48% or whatever it was who stayed home, even if they didn't vote for anyone to win, but all of them came out and voted for different third-party candidates according to their will? That would have sent, I think, a pretty powerful message out to Washington and to whomever did win. They'd ignore it, but it would.
It would be harder to ignore, and I do think that rather than try to shame people into voting, it's like let's try to give them something to vote for.
I feel the Republicans are running on fear of, immigrants and fear of gay people, because I don't know why, and Democrats are running on fear of Republicans. And one of their whole slogans they consider to just look at the other guy, and it's like, that's a horrible way. Your whole argument is that you're not as bad as Donald Trump? Is that really the best you can do?
And
let's see some positive solutions, some real policy changes, like, bringing green economy to Connecticut. Right now, solar is one of the largest growing in the U.S., and it's all going out to like Netherlands and Germany and China. Why? We've got an amazing manufacturing base in the state of Connecticut. Why aren't we doing things to help nurture that and look a little bit to the future so that we can do a little good for the planet and do good for the economy as well?
Now, I wanted to talk to you about, now a lot of your advocacy has been around gay rights and transgender rights.
Lately, I've been focusing on that, yes.
And I wanted to ask you what you feel is important about raising the visibility of our gay community, our trans community, in very public spaces, in very public ways?
Well, there's been a lot of prejudice and a lot of people coming out more and more out loud, saying a lot of horrendous things and untrue things about us. One study I saw about trans people is that this is kind of working in that the general public is starting to cool off towards trans rights a little bit. And I think, that this loud, vocal, hateful, angry minority has the power to scare other people into silence. But the more every one of us, and I've done speaking on this issue with Women's March and all around the state and to many, many people, I really feel the more all of us really bring it and bring not just tolerance, but real open-mindedness, like we stop accepting in the workplace those stupid man in a dress or, derogatory speech towards women, or, we need to really maintain a line of dignity and humanity. And I think all of us, whether we are gay, whether we're straight, whether we're black, whether we're white, anyone with a decent heart, just seeing the way humanity itself is being considered disposable, like it doesn't even matter anymore. And I think we all need to make a stand for our unified humanity and bring it when you go into school, bring it at your workplace. Don't let these stupid, harassing comments stand. Don't let that be the normal, Well, challenge it.
About 6 or 7 years ago in New London, the city almost sold a park, which I became really obsessed with. But one of the reasons is a lot of people wanted to sell the park. It was overgrown and it was hard to see inside of it. So there were all of these rumors about how it was where prostitution took place, how there was drug use. None of it was true, but because it was sort of out of sight and not real accessible, those rumors really took hold. It's a lot more open now, and we didn't manage to dodge that bullet, but I think it's kind of the same thing that
when you're open, you can see that the rumors aren't true.
Yeah, it's like if you see your neighbors, your relatives, then it's really harder to give credence to just like hearsay.
And it does, and I made that decision. I'm a trans woman, and I do live out as that, and I've done a lot of speaking, and I've purposely brought myself out just to tell the biggest, greatest secret about transgender people ever, which is that we're pretty much like everybody else. Same with gay people, same with black people. I mean, it's just people have these crazy ideas. And I think, and this is one of the reasons I really push civic engagement, and I don't care what end of the political spectrum. You can yell and scream all you want on Facebook. You go into town hall and you sit somebody face to face, look at them in the eye. You can't but see their humanity. And even if you don't change your opinions at that point, at least we can change the discussion and the nature of it, and bring a little civility back to civic engagement, to our civil lives.
Now, have you had any experiences campaigning for this role where the fact that you're a trans woman has had any impact? Or?
I'm known around town as trans. I'm open about it, but I don't necessarily wear it on my sleeve. And when I'm walking door to door, I'm talking about voting and getting out and being active. And, the trans thing isn't an issue. Guess what? It isn't. I would either perform well or not perform well regardless of this, as would anybody who is not transsexual, a cisexual person or a straight person. It's got nothing to do with the job whatsoever, except for the fact that a lot of trans people are excluded from voting because sometimes the gender identity they present doesn't match perfectly with their ID. And that's one of those things that can get them excluded.
So we need diversity in the registrar's office for more than one reason. And
just to bring that understanding, you know, not everyone who walks in to vote is going to necessarily match your gender expectations. Guess what? They're still a citizen. They still get to vote.
We only have about 3 more minutes, and I did want to show people more or less what the ballot looks like. The ballot I have here, I think, is the Waterford one. In a few days, the Secretary of State's office might have sample ballots for every town, but right now they don't. The Green Party is line F, at least on this ballot. I don't know. Can't guarantee that it will be on all the ballots, but there are some Green Party candidates who will be on every ballot in the state. We have a candidate for Attorney General, Peter Goslin, for Secretary of State, Mike DeRosa, for Comptroller, Ed Heflin, who has the excellent idea of a public bank. I'm missing one. And Jeff
Michelle
Russell,
Louise Bickling for second,
right,
Jeff Russell for
U.S.
Senate.
And Michelle Louise Bickling is running against Joe Courtney. I would love to see her get more votes than the Missing in Action Republican. She has a truly green platform that includes things like climate change and universal health care and tolerance and local economy.
I would encourage, I mean, the best way, if you can talk with her personally, you will guaranteed you'll be impressed by her intelligence and education and what she brings to that. But she does have a website as well that people can visit.
I think it's Bicking for Connecticut, but I'm not sure. If you look it up, you can find it. And
do the others too?
And some of, if you look up their names, I'm sure you could find them on Facebook or the website. But the other thing is that in some towns there will be additional candidates, like in Wyndham. Cass's name will be in that last column for Registrar of Voters. In this one in Waterford, Baird Welch Collins is on for state rep, and in New London, Chris Soto will be on for state rep. On the Green as well as Democratic lines. And I am being told we are totally out of time, but you have maybe 30 seconds to tell people how they can get in touch with you if they wanted to provide some.
I do have Cassandra Martineau on Facebook, so you can check that out. Probably the easiest way. Whatever you do, get out, vote, be active, stay active.
Thank you, Cass. Next week, actually, we have another Registrar of Voters candidate, Brian Gay, coming on next week. He's running for the office in East Hampton. So we'll talk more about voting, and we'll have all the ballots by then, I hope. So thank you so much for coming down to New London, Cass.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And we'll see you all next week. Thank you.